I know I live in hell, but I know the names of all the streets.
Man, that is it's a profoundly chilling statement, you know?
Yeah, it really is.
But it perfectly captures this universal human condition where we will actively choose a familiar misery over some, like, unfamiliar potential happiness.
Right. And welcome to today's deep dive, everyone, because if you're joining us right now, get ready because we are getting intensely practical today.
Oh, absolutely.
We're taking the brilliant insights from Dr. Henry Cloud's book, Necessary Endings, and we're going to apply them directly to you, like your life, your habits, your personal relationships.
Yeah, we are entirely skipping the boardroom strategies today.
Exactly. No corporate talk, no CEO restructuring. We're looking straight at the everyday, messy stuff that keeps us awake at night. So, okay, let's unpack this. Why on earth do we do that?
Do what, exactly?
Like, why do we stay stuck in a miserable situation? You know, a drained friendship, a toxic dating dynamic, or just a daily routine that literally sucks the life out of us just because it's familiar?
Well, I mean, if we look at the evolutionary biology of it, it actually makes perfect sense.
Really? Biology?
Yeah, because our brains are hardwired to perceive reality entirely through the lens of survival. Mm-hmm. And the number one metric for survival is predictability.
Oh, wow.
So if a situation falls into the category of normal or known, even if that known thing is actively causing you distress, your central nervous system can actually relax.
Because it knows what the threats are.
Exactly. It knows the names of the streets in hell.
So the misery is just like a known quantity. It's measurable.
Yes. But when we face an ending, when we consider breaking a habit or leaving a relationship, the brain loses that predictability.
It goes into the unknown.
Right. It literally treats the concept of an ending as an error message. It registers as a profound physical danger. You experience a genuine fight or flight response.
Just from thinking about quitting something.
Yeah. Because we're biologically programmed to resist the unknown, we interpret that anxiety of an ending as a sign that something has gone terribly, horribly wrong. We think, I feel terrified, therefore this ending must be a bad idea.
Right.
But the universal reality of nature tells a completely different story. Endings are not errors. They are a built-in absolute requirement for any biological system to thrive.
I mean, that makes sense. Just like the seasons of the year, right? Life demands a constant cycle of endings to make room for new growth.
Exactly. You can't have spring without winter.
So to everyone joining us right now, I want to ask you directly. Like, what is something in your life you're holding on to right now simply because you are terrified of the unknown? What's your familiar hell?
That's a great question to sit with.
Yeah, keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this. Because we're going to look at the natural blueprint for how things should actually grow. And to understand the biology of letting go, the source material points us toward a very specific analogy, which is a rosebush.
Oh, I love this analogy so much. The rosebush is just a masterclass in the biology of growth.
So how does it work?
Well, anyone who grows prize-winning roses understands that a bush cannot reach its full potential without a very intentional and honestly sometimes really ruthless process called pruning.
Ruthless is a good word for it.
Yeah, because a gardener doesn't just, throw water at the plant and hope for the best. They proactively cut living parts of the plant away.
Right.
And the first thing they look for are healthy buds that are good but not the best.
Wait, hold on. They cut off healthy parts of the plant. That seems completely counterintuitive if the goal is growth.
It totally feels counterintuitive until you look at the math of how a plant operates. Because a rose bush naturally produces way more buds than it can actually sustain.
Oh, I see.
The root system only has a finite amount of fuel. There's a strict limit on water, nutrients, and energy. If the plant tries to feed every single healthy bud it produces, those resources just get spread incredibly thin.
So you just end up with a bunch of mediocre flowers.
Exactly. The result is a massive bush covered in very average, mediocre, or even frail roses. So to get those massive, vibrant, show-stopping blooms, the gardener has to evaluate a perfectly healthy, good bud and just cut it off permanently.
Because by doing that, they redirect that highly limited fuel exclusively to the best buds.
You got it.
Man, here's where it gets really interesting to me. Because if you map that onto our everyday lives, it completely changes how we look at our own personal bandwidth.
Oh, 100%.
Like, think about your social calendar, your weekend hobbies, or just your emotional energy. We all have good but not best buds in our lives.
Yeah.
It's that perfectly okay friendship that you've had for like 5 years, but that secretly leaves you feeling a bit drained. Or it's the neighborhood volunteering committee you said yes to that you don't really even care about.
Right, right.
Every single time you say yes to one of those perfectly okay things, you are literally siphoning your very limited fuel away from a truly great passion or away from your primary relationship.
And what's fascinating here is the sheer scale of that problem. Like, life naturally produces way more opportunities, more acquaintances, and more interests than we can biologically process.
Oh, yeah. There's always another thing to do.
The source actually mentions a brilliant story about Bill Gates to illustrate this quantitative reality. He actually quit Facebook at one point simply because he had accumulated too many friends.
Wait, really? Bill Gates?
Yeah. The sheer cognitive load of trying to figure out if he actually knew someone or not became a massive drain on his energy. He realized he couldn't sustain that many connections, so he just gave up the platform entirely.
Wow.
We have to normalize the act of spring cleaning our lives. You will always accumulate more than you can maintain at a high level of quality.
That's a huge takeaway. Yeah. But, okay, so if pruning the good is all about saving our bandwidth and protecting our limited fuel, what do we do about the areas of our lives that are actively draining us?
Right, because it's not all just good buds.
Exactly. Life isn't just full of healthy but mediocre things. We have real problems.
So the gardener addresses that with the second type of pruning, which involves the sick branches.
The sick branches.
Yeah, these are parts of the bush that have a disease or a fundamental flaw. Now, a good gardener might try to rehabilitate a sick branch for a season. They might add extra fertilizer, adjust the watering schedule, give it some focus care.
Give it a chance to recover.
Exactly. But eventually, a critical assessment has to be made. If that branch is fundamentally incapable of getting well, pouring more water and more fertilizer into it isn't just a waste of time. It is actively harming the rest of the plant.
Because it's stealing the fuel.
Right. The sick branch acts as a parasite, pulling vital resources away from the healthy branches. The only way to save the whole is to sever the sick part.
Man. And I imagine the final step of the process is dealing with the parts of the plant that have just already given up entirely?
Yeah, the dead branches. These are the most visually obvious, but honestly, they're sometimes the hardest to remove because they get deeply tangled in the structure of the bush.
Oh, that makes sense.
They're already dead, but their physical presence is literally blocking the sunlight and the physical space that the healthy branches need to grow straight and tall. The healthy branches are forced to bend and contort themselves just to get around the dead wood.
That is such a vivid picture. Like, when we keep completely dead relationships or dead routines in our lives, our healthy relationships have to contort around them.
Exactly.
It twists our whole life out of shape. But I gotta say, I'm having a really hard time with this transition from plants to people.
How so?
Well, if we know we have sick branches in our lives, let's say a deeply troubled family member, or a toxic partner telling me to just make the cut feels incredibly heartless.
Yeah, I hear that a lot.
Because we're taught never to give up on the people we love.
Yeah.
How is abandoning hope not just a betrayal?
Well, we struggle with that exact tension because we profoundly misunderstand what hope actually means in the realm of psychology and personal growth.
Okay, unpack that for me.
We constantly confuse the concept of wishing with the concept of hoping. True hope is a wonderful virtue, but it requires two mandatory components. First, it requires a desire for something to get better.
Okay, sure.
Second, and crucially, it requires objective grounds for believing that tomorrow will actually be different than today.
Objective grounds, meaning like real, tangible evidence in the physical world, not just a feeling.
Correct. Wishing, on the other hand, is just desire stripped of any objective grounds. It's wanting a toxic dynamic to get better simply because you want it to, while completely ignoring the historical data that proves nothing is changing.
Ah, okay. That's a huge distinction.
Right. When we refuse to prune a sick branch in our lives, it's almost always because we are wishing, not hoping.
Yeah.
We stare at a situation that has been destructive for years, and we tell ourselves, oh, I hope it gets better.
Even though there's no proof it will.
Exactly. If we look at the actual data of that person's behavior, we have zero objective reason to believe it will change.
But even if it's just wishing, isn't giving up that wish a pessimistic way to live? Giving up still feels like a failure.
It definitely feels like a failure until you realize the psychological trap of wishful thinking.
Right.
Hitting a state of utter hopelessness is actually a massive virtue.
Hopelessness is a virtue.
Yes, it is the necessary catalyst for a breakthrough. The source material uses a very powerful, intense example of a spouse dealing with an addict husband.
Okay.
For years, she'd been operating on a strategy of pure wishing. just loving him more, talking to him late at night, reasoning with him, and wishing he would wake up one day and change.
Right.
To save her family, she had to reach a point of complete hopelessness about that specific strategy. She had to look in the mirror and admit, loving him and talking to him is never going to fix this. My current approach is entirely hopeless.
Wow. Okay. I see the distinction now. The hopelessness wasn't necessarily saying, my husband is a monster and my marriage is dead.
Exactly.
It was more like the method I am using to fix this is a dead branch.
Yes, beautifully said. The mechanism of change relies entirely on that realization. Getting completely hopeless about her old strategy forced the pruning moment.
Right.
As long as she had a false hope in talking to him, she was paralyzed. Once she killed the wishful thinking, she was free to find a new strategy that actually carried objective hope.
So what did she do?
She organized a professional intervention, she set firm boundaries, she moved the finances, and she enforced real consequences. That new, aggressive plan worked. He got sober.
Wow.
But she never would have discovered that new, hopeful plan if she hadn't first embraced the sheer, painful hopelessness of her old approach. Hopelessness is the alarm bell that forces us to stop digging the hole we are stuck in.
That makes a ton of sense. You have to kill the false hope to create the vacuum where real hope can exist. But, that requires us to be incredibly honest about the people we're dealing with. If true hope requires objective reasons to believe a person can change, how do we measure that? Because I'll be honest, I am incredibly biased toward my friends and the people I love. I will invent objective reasons if I have to.
Oh, we all do. And the source material anticipates that bias and provides a very practical diagnostic tool to cut through our own delusions.
Oh, perfect. What is it?
It categorizes people into 3 distinct types based entirely on one metric, which is how they respond to truth and feedback. How a person handles reality dictates whether you can have objective hope for their ability to change.
Okay, lay them out for me.
The 3 categories are the wise, the foolish, and the evil.
Let's run through these because this sounds like the exact filter we need.
Yeah.
What defines a wise person?
Well, a wise person is not someone who is flawless, highly educated, or never makes mistakes. A wise person is defined entirely by their relationship to feedback. When you go to a wise person and say, hey, when you speak to me in that tone, it really hurts me and damages our trust, they actually listen. The mechanism at play is that their ego is not tied to being perfect.
You can take the hit.
Exactly. They can tolerate the discomfort of being wrong, so they take ownership of their behavior, they adjust, and they actually change. With a wise person, talking works.
Got it.
You can have immense objective hope for a relationship with them because they metabolize truth into personal growth.
Okay, as you were describing that, a visual is coming to mind. It's like trying to fill buckets with water.
Okay, I like where this is going.
The wise person is an empty bucket. You can pour your feelings, your feedback, your boundaries into them, and it actually lands. A bucket fills up. They hold on to the water you just poured.
I love that. The water represents the emotional energy and effort you're pouring into the relationship, and it actually accumulates. But let's contrast that with the second category, the foolish person.
I have a feeling the bucket analogy is going to take a turn here.
It definitely will, because the foolish person responds to feedback with immediate, intense defensiveness.
Oh, we all know people like that.
Right. When you bring them the exact same truth, hey, this behavior hurts me, they deflect, they make excuses, they blame you for being too sensitive, or they blame their boss or their childhood.
Right, it's never their fault.
Exactly. They refuse to take responsibility for the impact of their actions. The psychological block here is deeply ingrained ego protection. They perceive your feedback not as helpful data for their relationship, but as a literal threat to their identity.
So they throw up a shield.
Yep. And the critical takeaway here is this. Talking to a foolish person more does not work. You can explain your feelings 100 different ways, using different words, but the words will just bounce right off the shield.
So going back to the bucket analogy, the foolish person is a bucket with a massive hole in the bottom. You can pour endless amounts of water into it, endless late-night conversations, endless patience, endless empathy, and it just runs right out the bottom. You keep pouring, thinking if I just pour a little faster, maybe the bucket will fill up.
But pouring more water doesn't fix the hole.
Right. The hole is a structural reality.
And you cannot fix a foolish person's structural reality by talking. Since words don't pierce the shield of their defensiveness, the only thing that alters their behavior is reality itself.
So what do you do?
A foolish person only changes when they are forced to feel the painful consequences of their actions. You have to stop pouring water.
You just have to cut it off.
You have to change your strategy and protect yourself with limits. If they are consistently late and ruining your plans, You stop explaining why it hurts, and you simply leave without them. You let them feel the consequence.
That is a tough pill to swallow, realizing your words are utterly useless in that dynamic. And what about the third category?
The third category is the evil person. Now, this isn't a mystical term, it's a behavioral one. These are individuals who genuinely want to cause harm. They actively seek to tear down, manipulate, or destroy. You do not try to reason with them because they will use your vulnerability against you.
That's terrifying.
It is, and you don't even bother setting complex boundaries to manage the relationship. The only objective hope for your own survival is to protect yourself with distance. You sever the tie, you get away from them.
Man, this raises a massive question for me, though.
What's that?
Let's say a listener is tracking with us. They understand the biology of the rosebush. They see the hole in the bucket of a foolish friend or a toxic job.
Yeah.
They clearly identify the dead branch.
Yeah.
Why is it still so agonizing to actually execute the ending? I mean, we talked about the fight or flight fear of the unknown earlier, but it feels like there is something deeper, almost insidious, that stops us at the very last second.
It is insidious. The source compares it to an internal hoarder mindset.
A hoarder mindset.
Yeah, if you've ever watched a documentary about hoarding or tried to help someone clean out a deeply cluttered garage, you see this exact pattern. They'll pick up a broken, completely useless item like a toaster with no cord, and right before they throw it in the trash, a spike of severe anxiety hits them.
Oh, yeah.
To soothe that anxiety, they say, but I might need parts from this later, or, my grandmother gave me this, I will miss it.
Even though it's garbage.
Right. And we do the exact same thing with our toxic relationships and our dead-end habits. We know the dynamic is broken, but right before we pull the trigger to end it, our emotional anxiety spikes.
And so we invent a reason to keep the broken toaster.
Exactly. Our brains manufacture what the source calls medicating thoughts.
Medicating thoughts. That phrase alone is fascinating. It implies we're trying to numb a pain.
We are absolutely numbing the anxiety of the impending cut. A medicating thought sounds like, well, maybe they will change tomorrow if I just try one more time.
Or, it wasn't that bad yesterday. Maybe I'm overreacting.
Yes. Or the classic, I'll just wait until after the holidays, it's too stressful right now. These thoughts have nothing to do with reality.
They're just excuses.
Their sole neurochemical purpose is to lower your anxiety in the present moment by delaying the ending. But the tragic cost is that they keep you permanently trapped in the familiar hell.
Wow.
To overcome this resistance, we have to look at those thoughts and recognize them for what they are. Chemical anesthetics designed to prevent us from performing necessary surgery. If we want to get to the health on the other side, we have to endure the anxiety of the ending.
Okay, so let's put ourselves in that moment.
Yeah.
You tolerate the anxiety,
Right.
You see through the medicating thoughts, you sit down, you have a hard conversation, you quit the job, you break the habit, you prune the dead branch.
Yep, you do.
You're standing there with the shears in your hand,
Yeah.
and the deed is done.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't just instantly feel amazing, do you? Because in my own life, whenever I've made a massive necessary cut, there is a brutal emotional hangover.
The hangover is very real, and it brings us to the next crucial step in the biological process, which is metabolizing the ending.
Metabolizing it.
You cannot just cut a major piece out of your life, walk away, and pretend it didn't hurt. Even when an ending is 100% necessary, healthy, and objectively good for you, it still involves a loss of what used to be.
Right.
And the human body processes loss through grief. If you do not metabolize that grief, if you refuse to digest it, it stays trapped in your nervous system. You end up carrying the unresolved baggage of that dead branch straight into your next season or your next relationship.
But how do you practically metabolize an ending? Digesting grief sounds incredibly abstract. It sounds like something you need 10 years of therapy to figure out.
It doesn't have to be abstract. It actually comes down to very tangible physical actions. If you look at the cognitive science of closure, the two hemispheres of our brain process reality differently. The left brain is literal. It understands timelines and facts. The right brain is emotional. It holds on to attachments. For an ending to fully process, the emotional brain needs a physical, symbolic marker to understand that the timeline has permanently shifted.
So you need an event in the physical world to force the emotional brain to catch up with the literal brain.
Precisely. The source discusses the profound power of symbolic events. This could be anything from organizing a formal goodbye dinner to mark the end of a career phase, to physically taking the divorce papers and burning them in a fireplace, or honestly, just dedicating a quiet afternoon to sit in an empty room and have a deep, uninterrupted cry.
Just letting it out.
Yeah, these physical rituals bridge the gap in the brain. They give the emotional side a physical anchor that says, this is over. It belongs to the past now. It stops the cycle of rumination.
That suddenly explains why human beings have invented funerals and graduation ceremonies across every culture in history. We need the physical ritual to tell our bodies that a chapter has closed. But beyond just the acute grief of a specific ending, the book also dives into this broader, ongoing concept of personal sustainability. How does this constant cycle of pruning relate to keeping ourselves sustainable in the long run?
Well, sustainability is the ultimate goal of the gardener. It is about taking a ruthless, honest inventory of what is currently depleting your personal resources.
Check the fuel levels.
Exactly. It requires asking yourself a very difficult question. Is the life I'm living right now, my schedule, my relationships, my obligations, one that I can maintain indefinitely without breaking down?
Yeah.
Often, because we refuse to prune, we end up in dynamics where we are constantly running on a deficit. We are spread so thin among the good but not best buds and drained so heavily by the sick branches that we lose our core identity.
Right.
The source poses a question that should stop us all in our tracks. Are you currently in a dynamic where the real you is slowly going to sleep?
Is the real you slowly going to sleep? That's a heavy, heavy question. And I want to throw that directly to you listening right now. Take a hard look at your calendar today. Look at your emotional commitments this week.
Yeah, really look at it.
Look at the people you are spending your primary energy on. Is what you are doing right now actually sustainable for your soul? Or is it secretly, quietly draining the life out of you? Because if it's the latter, that is a prime candidate for a necessary ending. You have to protect the root system. And the root system is you.
It really is. If we pull all of this back to the bigger picture, it all loops back to the biology of the rosebush. You are the bush. You only have a finite amount of fuel in this life. If you do not proactively prune the good but not best, if you refuse to cut off the sick branches that have no objective hope of changing, and if you leave the dead space tangled in your daily routine, you will survive, but you will never bloom the way you're designed to.
So to recap this incredible journey we've been on today, we started by looking straight at the evolutionary fear of endings and countered it with the rosebush rule, understanding that pruning isn't an error message, it's a biological necessity.
Yes.
We uncovered the immense, surprising value of hopelessness, realizing that giving up on wishful thinking is the only way to discover objective hope.
Right.
We learned how to diagnose the people in our lives, figuring out who is the empty bucket we can pour into and who is the bucket with a hole in the bottom. We exposed our own medicating thoughts. And finally, we learned how to survive the cut by physically metabolizing the grief and fiercely protecting our own sustainability.
It's a lot to take in. And as we wrap up this analysis, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over today.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think about the fear that is currently holding you back from making a hard, necessary cut in your life. Now ask yourself this. What if the greatest, most vibrant, most beautiful season of your entire life is currently trapped right behind a necessary ending that you were simply too afraid to make today?
Man, that is the perfect thought to end on. Because on the other side of that familiar hell is an unfamiliar but potentially stunning new neighborhood. We want to hear from you. Jump into the comments below and let us know. What are the dead branches in your life that you need to finally prune? What medicating thoughts have you been using to delay the cut? Let's get a conversation going down there. And if this deep dive sparked an aha moment for you today, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe to the channel so we can keep bringing you more deep dives into life-changing insights. Until next time, protect your fuel, keep growing, and don't be afraid to prune.